and welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast about cooperation, conflict, and culture at work. My name is Paul Emzev, and today I'm here with Adam Lawrence. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Paul. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining. Today's topic is about improvisation, and we decided to do this podcast a bit differently and improvise on the content. So I didn't prepare very much. Adam, I think you didn't either, right?
Cool. Not at all. Let's fail wonderfully.
Yeah, let's see what happens. The main topic of today is improvisation and how improvisation can help us collaborate better, can help us work together better. Adam, I've seen your LinkedIn profile and I was a bit shocked because there's so much stuff you're doing. And I was like, damn, I don't want to read all of this out. It's it will be too much. But maybe you know this. Maybe you know the situations. Usually it's in kindergartens or like I think in primary schools where the children invite the parents, like usually the dads, like back in the times was always the dad.
Yeah.
And the dad was telling a bit about his job to children.
Oh, right.
And I was wondering, maybe you had the situation yourself, I'm not sure, but if not, maybe you could think about a scenario and share with us how you would present yourself and your work in a kindergarten.
That's really nice. So, hi, kids. You might know that some of your family and your friends, the grown-ups, they work in organizations, yeah, and they try to do good stuff. They try to help people out. Maybe they make something, maybe they organize something, or they run something, but they want to do a good job so that the people like what they do and maybe pay more for it, or pay for it, or give them their attention, or give them some love or some likes, yeah. But that's really hard because people in organizations have different ideas about how work should be done, have different ideas about the way that we should help other people with our services or our products. So what I do is I try to show them ways of working together. And they're ways of working together which are really practical. They're really down to earth, yeah? And they're ones that nearly everyone can join in on, even their customers, so that they can really do great work and they can help people and they can become more successful as organizations because they help people better.
Wow, nice.
That was a fun one.
Talking about improvisation, I know that you have a background in improvisation, and maybe it would be interesting to start with a question about how improvisation influences your work. What are the things you draw from improvisation for your daily work?
I think it's absolutely central to my work. People call what I do different things. When I'm not talking to kindergarten people, I might use technical terms for my work. I work in the field of innovation. I work in the field of customer, user, employee experience. I work in the field of design. And also in facilitation and coaching and things like this. But it's around human collaboration. That's always very central to this. And whenever we are trying to help organizations to do something new or do something different, that means change. And change always has a degree of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to work. So improvisation is really very interesting because with the improvisation skills, we can become comfortable and competent in uncertainty. That is the key thing of improvisation, is being comfortable and competent with not knowing what's going to happen. And that's really antithetical to many organizations. I've just been here teaching students here in Madrid, and that's why I'm on my laptop today. Sorry about the picture quality if it's not great. But we did a little simulation together, a brain training, and we tried to make something new using actually an improvisation activity called one-word stories. So they told stories in groups, one word at a time. And I asked them to say, okay, after they did that, what did you notice? What beliefs or needs did not help you? Yeah, what blocked the flow of your story? What blocked the flow of your innovation? And they said it was things like thinking a lot, planning ahead, trying to be good, trying to be right, trying to follow the rules, trying to get the grammar right and stuff like this. Yeah, okay, interesting stuff. Those are the behaviors which organizations normally value. Thinking ahead, right, planning ahead, getting it right, not making mistakes and so on. But they actually blocked them in the context of doing something new. And what kind of behaviors were useful? What helped the flow? I just not taking yourself too seriously, just try something, accept what's there and build on it, listen better, do the obvious, do the simple thing. Yeah. These helped that innovation task. And I don't know if I want to live next to a nuclear power station built by an organization which says, oh, we'll just try something. It'll be fine. Make it simple. We need all these parts. Let's just simplify it. Put a straight pipe through here. No, I don't want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not appropriate in all parts of organizations. But when we're trying to do something new, that behavior is what we need. And that behavior is the behavior which is usually not respected in organizations. And by using improvisation, I can help people to understand that behavior or to experience it or to even get better at it so they can make a choice. This is a known or knowable problem. I can do what I know is good. I can plan ahead. I can try and see the future, etc., etc. This is an unknown or unknowable problem. And planning ahead or trying to see the future is not only useless here, it's actually harmful. I need to explore. And teaching people around how to explore is very, very useful. We don't need to explore all the time. 90% of the time we're running the organization, but 10% of the time, maybe we're changing the organization. And that's why we need 2 skill sets and not 1. Improvisation is that second skill set.
Right. What would you recommend to people who feel like they would like to improvise more? They feel like, yeah, I'm too much on this controlling side, and maybe I should go more on this freedom and letting things flow side. But they struggle with that. What would be a good path towards more improvisation in everyday life?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, one thing to remember is we're all very good at this. We do it all the time. Everyone improvises all day and every day. You don't have a plan for your day today. You may have had a routine. You get up and you have breakfast, but there was no milk, so you had toast instead. That was improvising. Yeah. You went out of the house and it was raining, so you went back and got a coat. That was improvising. We're doing it all the time. We're adapting to the world around us, and improvisation is just noticing and adapting. Yeah. So first thing is we're good at this. We tend to do it at the weekends and not at work. It's weird. At the weekends, we'll say to our friends, "Hey, come over in the afternoon sometime, whenever. We'll see who comes. We'll get a pizza maybe, or we'll go out. We don't know, yeah." And that can be a fantastic weekend that starts off like that. We never say to our colleagues at work or to our clients at work, "Come over sometime later in the week. We'll have a meeting, maybe. We'll see what happens." Yeah. People get very upset if you suggest that. They say, "I want an agenda, or I'm not coming." Yeah. Which is reasonable. I understand that preference. But we can think about, what am I doing anyway, which I could apply elsewhere? So what am I doing at weekends that I could apply in work? Maybe I should have the occasional open meeting, no agenda, see who comes. I don't know. That could be interesting. Maybe things will turn up which are not on our agenda, but we should be on our agendas. Yeah. And of course, you can get training in this stuff. I mean, there are, or you can join an improv group. Most of the improvisation that we see out there is based on theater improvisation, like those TV shows, like Whose Line Is It Anyway, where people, get a task and they have to make people laugh. That's the kind of improvisation that we think of most. But there are many other places where improvisation takes place. Jazz music is a fantastic example. Some people say if it's not improvised, it's not jazz. That's a thing which you can argue about. But, there are masterful people in jazz music who learn to listen to each other and pick up something from it and play with it and turn it around and give it back. There are professions where improvisation is incredibly important. If you think about surgery, a surgeon, with all the scanning in the world, a surgeon can still go inside somebody's body and find something unexpected. And they have to decide, do we carry on? Do we change the plan? Do we give up? Yeah. They improvise in that moment, especially if it's an emergency. So there are people out there who have these skills. And if you want to get better at it, I think the first thing is to understand that it's okay to try, and it's not always going to work. Yeah. And if you want it to work immediately, you're already failing because you're still in that control, predict the future situation. If you can get out of that mindset into, I'm going to try and experiment and mess it up and then see what I learned from that, you're already starting to improvise. It certainly helps if you've got someone to do it with you, someone that you talk to about this and say, I want to try something. Shall we do this meeting differently? See what happens. Like you and I are doing this podcast differently. We just said, let's try it. We may crash and burn. Okay, then we learned it was a bad idea, or we should have done it differently. There are those improv groups out there, and I like I think that's a very good place to learn, because where the theater improv people are good, like the TV show guys, is they've got quite a codified, well, that's the wrong word, codified. There are a bunch of principles that people think are important. They don't all agree what they are. They don't all agree which are the most important ones, but there's that treasure chest of things that you can look at. Yeah. You say, oh, that's a really useful principle. And what's remarkable, I go to one of my favorite conferences every year is the Applied Improvisation Network Conference, AIN, yeah? And it's a pretty much improvised conference to different levels because different groups organize it. But we often do a show at that as well. The people there, some of them are performance improvisers, many are not, but some are. And so when we're at that thing, there's often a show in the evenings, and people come together on stage there who have never played together before, but you would never know it. They just click like this because they have the same little suitcase full of principles. They might use different words for them, you know, but they have the same philosophy, which is, this is how I collaborate with someone in a situation of an unknowable future.
Yeah.
And you can pick those things up pretty easily. You practice them a bit, and I think you'll find it super, super useful.
Yeah. I know that you also worked as an actor, right? And as a comedian, and a lot of it in the art scene. I think musician was also a time you had, or you still play?
Singer, not really musician.
Singer, okay.
I stand near musicians and make noises. Yeah.
Yeah. So you seem to me like almost a natural talent. And I was wondering, while you were sharing all of that, does this improvisation in your life come natural to you, or is it also something that you have to or had to overcome yourself at some point?
No, for me, it's a very natural thing. Yeah. Not all of the things you mentioned are natural to me, but I am not great at planning. Yeah. And so I have become quite good. Instead of planning things, I've become quite good at planning for things. And so building in the structures that I will need so they're ready so that I can adapt when things change. I had some times in my life where I had big plans and they didn't work out. And maybe that changed my approach to that. I'm kind of a last minute kind of guy as well. So I often go into things half prepared or under prepared. And at some point I accepted that and said, maybe you should just get better at doing it that way. I do prepare some things. There are some things that are very important, you know, theater, as you say, sometimes the timing is incredibly important. We rehearse things 100 times to get it just right. But then on the night, suddenly the light's in the wrong place. What do? I have to change the scene. I have to stand in a different place. That might affect the stunt that comes later. So I have to know that my colleague knows I'm standing in a different place. These things will happen. But yeah, for me, it's leaning to my strengths. I know people who've had the opposite situation, who've been really, really strong on planning and so on, and have had to develop this, but they're amazing. It's a muscle. Yeah, you can practice anything and get better at it.
Working in all kinds of different environments and with many different clients, do you have certain areas or certain teams where you would say those in those areas improvisation works better than in other fields? You mentioned the nuclear plant, for example, which was like an example of maybe like where the options are limited, let's say. But do you have some clients or teams that like that's the perfect like place where improvisation can thrive?
I think it's more about what they're trying to do right now, you know, whether it's a situation which is knowable, where it's possible to know what's going to happen. In that case, improvisation might not be useful. Look, if we have a builder, yeah, and she has a building company and she's built on this plot of land, she's built 99 houses all the same. When she builds the 100th one, you don't want to start improvising. You just want to do it slightly faster, slightly better, and slightly cheaper than the ones before. Yeah, that's fully appropriate. But then she decides she's going to start out a homeowners advisory service based on her knowledge, and never done that before. It would be weird there to make huge plans and, you know, try to say, I know exactly what's going to happen, because you don't know. I need to maybe find some friendly customers or some friends and say, can I try this with you and see what works? And you give me some feedback later, and start to sort of experiment her way towards doing a new thing. And that's very, very important. There are some organizations where, because of what they do, they get very shaped by the content of their work. So for example, you might think of someone in a high risk business in terms of risky to human beings. Like I work with a great organization who do medical testing. You know, they test pharmaceuticals, they test medicines, yeah? And for lots of reasons there, in their everyday work, it's really important that they are very careful, they are very risk averse, and that they don't just change things. I mean, you're doing a medical trial. If you change the process halfway through the trial, you just ruined the trial. And it's a medical trial, you might have risked somebody's life, yeah? So, or risk their healing or whatever. So that's a time not to mess around. But sometimes in organizations like that, not these ones especially, but sometimes in organizations like that, you'll find that that risk avoidance will then come over into everything they do. And so someone like copies in 30 people on every email because they might need to know, well, yeah, but now you're slowing down the whole organization. It's just about a room booking. We don't, if it goes wrong, we'll figure it out. Yeah. We don't need to have that same risk aversion that we need building our nuclear power station, doing our medical tests. Yeah. We don't need to have that when we're booking a room or doing something new. And helping people to understand this is a different context. Paul, there's one thing which is really, really crucial to me when I help organizations, when I help them try to investigate, explore new ways of doing things or alternative ways of doing things. There's a really big moment for me, which is when I get, and this sounds so basic, but it's really a moment that happens when I start to think, yes, they start to understand there's more than one type of problem. And that sounds so basic, but it's amazing how many organizations approach everything with the same behavior, as if they were all the same type of problem. And even my model of knowable and unknowable, of course, it's a stupid binary model, which is far too simple for reality, but it's still better than having just one model. It was just one approach, rather. So helping people figure out this is appropriate here, this is appropriate there, that's absolute solid gold. And in one of those sides, that's where improvisation is strong.
And I have now this picture in my mind of maybe searching within the limitations that we have, maybe search for little holes or little places where we could be more improvisational, right?
Certainly, certainly. And sometimes, occasionally, it is a goal, you know. Orgs come and they say, we want to get better at doing this. And that's a luxury. Then we can just do it as training or as, you know, as having fun together and just say, let's learn this skill, let's practice this skill. More usually, there's business going on. Yeah. And we have a project or a bunch of projects where we say, okay, our behavior right now is not helpful. But the mandate is not to change the behavior of the organization, it's to make that project more successful. So in those situations, you might have to work differently. You might have to work within the project in a different way. You might say, okay, let's try the next meeting a different way. Yeah. Or let's try 3 versions. Let's just split our budget in 3 and see which one of them turns out to be more useful, which is, by the way, a thing which every investment broker would do. They would never invest all their money in one set of shares. They'd have a portfolio of shares. But many organizations, when you just have a portfolio of innovation, they go, what? No, we know this is the one idea. You think, well, luck with that. Yeah. That means if it fails, you can't say, oops, I learned something. You keep trying to push it through. You keep trying to, as Markus Hormeß said, you know, drag that dead horse over the finish line. But it's never going to stand up again because it's all you have, because you've been fixed on making it work rather than being able to say, okay, let's figure out early it's not working, but luckily we have other options which are already running.
And would you then say that flexibility is kind of the core of improvisation? Because listening to you, for me, it circulates all around some mental, cognitive, but also maybe practical flexibility, right?
I think so. And so if we think about how organizations work, there are structures in organizations that are very important, which make it hard to be flexible. You know, budgets are often set in advance. Yeah. Resources are allocated, and when the time's up, you can't have that space anymore, you know, or that budget or those people. We have roadmaps, we have deadlines, we have legislation around when things have to happen and how fast we have to be and stuff like this. So just to say be more flexible is not actually very useful. to say we have a goal of flexibility, how do we deal with these things? That's a different question. And I think flexibility is a very, very important part of it. The other part, though, is a sensing thing. It's noticing, or seeing, and figuring out, here is an opportunity, as you said, finding those spots, or especially when it's between people in an organization, in a team, noticing what the other person needs, giving them what they need. And one of the most important parts of improvisation, which comes from like theater improv or from jazz, but it's super important in applied improvisation in organizations, is when we say, make the other one look good, make the other person look good. So if, you're an interviewer right now, and as an interviewer, it's a great interview for you if you make me look good, and it's a great conversation. Great conversation for me if I make you look good. If it's a good conversation, we both win from that. And those kind of behaviors is a degree of flexibility. It's also an attitude, that I have a positive intention for this, but it's also the ability to notice. And some improvisers call that notice more. Some call it listen. They're different words for the same thing, but actually it's amazing how often we don't really listen to each other. We in conversations, we're thinking what to say next, waiting for a space to put that in there, and learning to actually listen. I'm not good at this. I'm not saying I'm good at this. But learning to do that is really, really key to this as well. So there's flexibility, there's also an awareness, and there's a positive intent.
Yeah. When I hear you talking about flexibility and also about this sensing, for me, I associate this with rather passive behavior. And it reminds me of when I'm in a group of friends and we plan something for the weekend, and everybody says, I'm flexible. I'm also flexible. And nobody proposes something. So there's no one who sets something into motion, because everybody's super flexible and everybody's listening to, to someone else, but no one's actually doing the step. And I'm wondering, and I know this also from improvisational theater, because I really enjoy watching it. And I know that there's always someone who has to start, right? Someone starts playing a scene, doing whatever it is, to put the whole thing into motion. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this balance between sensing, being flexible, but also proposing something and maybe proactively going forward?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we do need both of these, of course. If we all just say, my job is to make you look good, then nothing happens. Our job is to make each other look good. And one of the other sayings that you'll hear in various ways around improvisation is, put yourself in danger. Be willing to take a risk. And what really closely links to that is that idea of make the other person look good. If we imagine that we're in a stage improv scene, you and I together, and I have a brilliant idea, I think it's a good idea, or a fun idea, or an interesting idea to kick the scene off, but I've got no idea where it's going to go, I will do it, because I know that it's going to be you who's going to save my behind. If I get stuck, I know you're right there to make me look good. And if the two of us are doing that for each other, it makes it easier to make that start, because I'm not taking over. There's a very, very important, I mean, sometimes that happens. I'm not a very good improviser. I often take over. But there are one of the things that really, really works on stage is this idea of we don't take over, we make an offer. There's even a great book called Everything is an Offer, for improvisers. And the idea is that if I go out on stage and just say, oh my goodness, I didn't know it was going to be this hot here, that can be enough. And if you want to make me look good, you will come and you will add to that. You will yes and that. You will say, I know, it's just incredible. I hope we have enough water. Oh, there's a story starting now. If you don't want to make it look good, and you say, actually, I'm quite comfortable with the temperature. The scene went down. You didn't accept my offer. And so there's this yes and mentality, which applies to stage improv and so on, which is very, very important. When you come into applied improvisation in organizations, you have to maybe phrase that sometimes differently, and think about when it's appropriate to say yes, but, or when it's appropriate to say no. on
Yeah.
stage, they wouldn't work out very well. And there's a lot of very deep improvisation here, a theory here, and philosophy here about how saying no can also be a way of saying yes and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into that because it's like that's for late night beery conversations, improvisation conferences. But on a basic level, what we do on stage is a really good way of learning, and it's not the same as what we do in real life. Improvisation and applied improvisation, or let's say stage improvisation and applied improvisation, have a lot of overlap, but they are different because the consequences are different.
And still, I mean, in my head, there's a clear link. For example, when I think about brainstorming sessions, right, all kinds of team meetings, a team meeting, and there are always some people who have a lot of ideas and some people who maybe hold back. And I think that often we assume that holding back is kind of the politer form, and going forward with an idea is more of the maybe the ruder side of the spectrum. And I really like when you made the point of an offer, because making the first step, I think if it's with the intention that you do a service to the rest of the group in doing the first step, I think it's completely different than saying, I do the first step because I want my idea to be implemented, right? So depending on the intention, I think it can be very much other oriented to take that first step and to do that in favor of the group, right?
That's critical. There's a lot of many years ago, I did a degree in psychology, and I'm quite interested in how people's minds work. Long ago to be useful really today, but it's given me some starting points. And one of the things that really worries me in organizations, and I talk about this too much, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but I think what I call idea fetishism is that people are very much in love with their ideas. And there's some interesting psychology around this as well, around confirmation bias and stuff like that. But basically, when my ideas are attacked, I feel attacked. You know, if you say you don't like my idea, I defend it because I feel I'm a good, smart person. Of course, it's a good, smart idea. And if you say my idea is not good and smart, you're saying I'm not good and smart. Yeah. So this kind of thing happens. It's really weird how that applies to ideas, but not to things like data. Insights or prototypes quite the same way. Yeah, because it's in my head and it's pure in my head somehow. Anyway, so helping people to get past that, to be less in love with ideas, is one of the things that things like stage improvisation are very good at, because you practice letting go.
Yeah.
I've often said that for me, the key skill of a designer is letting go. And I'm not good at this myself. Yeah. But just saying, okay, I had this idea, but if I throw it out there, it's going to come back better, or it's going to not come back at all, and something better will come back. And that's really hard for people. So you need to practice that in situations where you feel in a safe space. And an improv situation is one of those. There's a wonderful, very famous improv ... Here's an important thing. With some audiences, I call it a game. Another audience, I call it brain training. Another audience, call it a simulation or an experiment. But there's an improv activity, yeah, which is called different choice or change. And it's really simple one. And it's so cool. You get two people. One of them, you give them some theme for a story and they start telling a story. Yeah. And the other person is supposed to facilitate that story, to help make the story even better. But all they can do is say the word change or different choice. And when the storyteller hears that, they have to take the last part of the story and turn it around, make something new out of it. Yeah. And it's, for people at first, very frustrating. You know, so I woke up early this morning, change. So I overslept this morning and I decided I had to hurry into work, change. And I decided, screw it, I'm not going to work. Yeah. And I ran out of the street and I looked around and I went and decided to go to work. And I was in a red car, change. I was in a blue car, change. I was in a yellow car, change. I was in trouble. You know, it's this input which actually makes the story better. And at first, for both sides, it's really hard. It's hard to have because I'm planning ahead, I'm thinking of the future, and suddenly my whole story has to change. That's really difficult. But for the person, the facilitator who's saying change or saying different choice, they feel awkward. They feel like they're criticizing. It's not good enough. And just practicing that one and saying, whoa, we just made a story which I would never have thought of. That in itself is very interesting. Having to respond to outside inputs, take you to a place you could never have got by yourself. That in itself is valuable if we're discussing innovation and novelty and stuff like this. But also the fact that by giving feedback to somebody, I could make things better. That's what the other person is learning. And that together, you say, who has responsibility for the story? Both of us? Interesting. How can we transfer that into our lives?
Yeah, yeah. And to me, there's this word of ownership that comes to my mind when you talk about that. First, like the kind of bad example of being very much in ownership of my first idea for whatever reason and not letting go of it. But then also the necessary co-ownership of the process of saying I mean, if we don't care at all about anything, then nothing would happen either, right? So we have to care about something, and we have probably to come up with some ideas first to then change them. But the question is how to throw an idea in and then letting it go again. So having the motivation to throw something in, knowing that I have to let it go again, I find it very interesting. And I recently read this book. You surely know it. It's called Yes and, this famous improv book. And I really like this one explanation that also in improvisational theater, the first idea you give is not about the idea, but it's actually, again, a service to the group to help them develop something better out of this. So you create kind of the first basis that is needed. Without it, there's nothing. But that's your service to the group. It's not the idea itself. It's just proposing something that can then be rebuilt. And I really like that picture.
It is. And that's that making an offer. Which I think is so important. And there's another difference as well here, which is really important between stage improvisation and using improvisation in projects and so on. And that's that on the stage, we have an audience who are listening. They want to understand what's going on. So we do one thing at a time. In a project, we can do multiple things at a time. Yeah. So we might not even take one idea to start. We might take 20 ideas to start with, or 50 ideas, or 1,000 pieces of data, or whatever it is. We can work in parallel because we haven't got to give that clear show all the time. It hasn't got to be interesting from the outside. It has to work as a process. So then one of the ways you get people to care less about ideas is to have more of them in the room. Yeah. Because if I have one idea and you have one idea and we choose yours, I lost. If I have 20 ideas and you have 20 ideas and we choose one of yours, okay, 19 of yours lost. It's not quite as and 20. It's not quite the same situation. And if there's a bunch of us, and if you're using this work form well, there's a bunch of you out there, then your ideas are banging together anyway, and they're rubbing off on each other, and and we're not really sure who has ownership at the end, and that's very, very important. That's that shared collaboration. One of the things that I do a lot when I work in physical space, I work online and I work offline, for using things like sticky notes and so on, or pieces of paper. I try and use formats whereby lots of people touch that piece of paper, where it gets passed around a lot and it gets a bit tired, it gets a bit dirty and bent, and it's not precious anymore. Yeah. And if you do that, it's easy to move on from that. One of the systems I use to select what projects will be, or what the next steps are in a project, is a thing where people make, I don't know, sketches or something, and they put them on the floor. And I say, if you think that's an interesting thing to work on next, go and stand on it. And people go, stand near. I say, no, stand on it. Yeah. So the little poster that they've made gets footprints on it, it gets torn. Great. Because it was only a starting point. And it makes it easy to go on to the next thing. When we take too much care with stuff and present it too carefully, it's very easy to fall in love. And falling in love is the opposite of being able to let go.
Yeah. And for me, there's also one big elephant in the room because it sounds super nice, co-ownership, collaborative processes. Nobody owns anything. We own everything together, almost like in a socialist utopia kind of world, But the main big elephant that I see often in the room, especially in big companies, is the ego. So ego of people. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Like, how do you work with people who have big ego? Because I'm sure you also work with like higher ranking people who often have a big ego. What are your thoughts on that topic of ego?
That's very important. It links closely to that idea thing, that idea fetishism, because when ideas are in the room, ego's in the room. So one of the things I do generally in my practice is trying to devalue the concept of the idea, to use the word idea less, literally use the word less, and use word like data or insight or experiment or result, use those more. So we get back to a kind of a more of a sort of scientific model, if you like, where it's not about being right, it's about doing the work well and finding out what the truth is. That's a different type of leadership, by the way. It's quite different for someone whose leadership structure is I know the answer, to change to a leadership form which is around I know how we'll find the answer. Like a good lab leader would do. But that's very interesting. But yeah, there are certainly people who have strong belief in themselves, strong belief in their value to the organization. Often that's very justified. Often they've had a history of successes and so on. And I think it's very, very important to acknowledge that we're talking about identities of people here. They see their expertise and they see their knowledge and their experience as part of themselves, not just as a commodity. And if we're doing innovation type things, if we're trying to change things, it's easy to come across as saying your knowledge is old hat, your expertise is yesterday's expertise. And people feel attacked in their identity by that. So instead of doing that, if I can say, that's amazing, that's great stuff you've got there, we need all of that. Here's some new stuff. Do you want to look at it and see if it's useful? See how it merges what we've got already? Because we do need the new and the old. We do need the structure and the freedom. It's never just one of them. We need qualitative and quantitative, all this stuff. It's always a mix. And presenting it in that way really helps. If that ego comes up to a point where it becomes a problem, where it blocks the progress, then one thing that I've learned from a brilliant improviser and facilitator called Renatus Hoogenraad, who's a colleague of ours at the Co-Creation School and a co-author in our books, he always says, be curious. Be curious about that, And nobody got up this morning with the idea of blocking your project. The person who is saying that, they believe, who is getting in the way, they believe they're being responsible. They're serving the interests of the organization. They're doing their job. It's their job to get in the way right now. Fantastic. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. But if I can find out what's going on, if I can be curious to why they're doing this, and I'll tell you, that's really interesting you say that. Can you tell me more? What are your worries about this? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. And often that breaks things down. I was reading an article just today about in the Guardian, I think, or BBC, I forget, one of the two, about political discussions right now. And the world is very polarized in terms of politics. And there are some people who are saying, and I belong with them, there are some things that I'm not going to discuss on that. That is non-negotiable for me. But there are shades of things in between where you say, okay, that's very hard for me to understand why you would say that about those people, or why you would do that to this resource or whatever. And we can say, no, I disagree. Or we could say, it's really hard for me to understand why you say that. Can you tell me more about your reasoning? I'm being curious in that way. What's really interesting is that the studies seem to show that actually helps that person start to let go of it. Or start to at least be interested in finding some kind of middle ground with me. There might be a thing which I find distasteful, but being curious at how somebody got there, presumably an intelligent person, presumably who thinks they're doing good for the world, how did they get to that situation? And being curious about that, often we'll find maybe there are some things that we have in common that we can agree on, that we can find a way forward. And I'm saying I'm excluding certain things from that. There are some things that are, for me, are non-negotiable, but there's some gray areas where you can be curious and you can find out more. Back in our work context, that's certainly nearly always useful. Just to say, oh, that's really surprising, or that's unusual, or I've not heard that before, or that's just interesting. Can you tell me more about how you got to that thought? That nearly always leads to a great conversation.
Yeah. It really resonates with me. And if you think about psychotherapy, for example, and like the big names like Carl Rogers or so, this what you're mentioning, the acceptance, right? Like start with acceptance is exactly as you say, often a door opener, right? And I really like what you're saying about dealing with ego, with other people's ego, to not reject it, but kind of use it, right? Because as you say, there are also some benefits of it. It can be useful. It can be part of the solution.
That can be part of your driving force moving forward. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, back in the 60s, Edgar Schein, you know, business process consulting, back in the old school, he's talking about how how ideas are successful if people think it's their idea. Yeah. So if someone's has fallen in love with a thing, how can we use that energy, that power they're going to have, that resilience they're going to have to push this thing forward if they feel ownership or co-ownership of that thing? That's super, super interesting. And, you know, there's a cliche, and I'm a designer, and I go into organizations and I hear this a lot, that you go in and the boss has already got an idea and our job's going to be to break the boss's idea. And maybe it is, but you know, the boss may have worked for years on that. They may have had hundreds of conversations. They may have seen a million data points. They may have really matured this. Maybe it's exactly what we need. So going in with the mindset, the preset in my head that we're going to have to invent something new here, and anything people believe already is wrong, it's just dumb. I'm sorry. Yeah. There are brilliant people in organizations with brilliant ideas. Let's find ways to mix this up with the new stuff and make a great cocktail.
Yeah. Is that something you are sometimes struggling with? Like, because now I'm thinking we all have an ego, right? So what you're saying, this extra effort of trying to be curious, trying to be understandable to a person who has, in your opinion, maybe extreme political views, it also has to do with your own ego, right? How do you have some advice on how to make that extra step to overcome yourself, to say, okay, I'm doing the extra effort to be more curious, even though everything inside me is like, in alarm mode?
Yeah. And it's really, really hard, you know. And again, on the politics side, there are limits and so on to each of us, but let's stick with the business for the moment.
Yeah.
It depends what you. So let's say you're a bit in love with yourself. I'm an actor, obviously. I'm in love with myself. Yeah, that's why we do it. We want the world to love us. Yeah, and we need approval, applause. Yeah. So let's say that I think I'm useful in the room. The question is, what do I attach that usefulness to? Do I say I'm going to be useful at boxing my ideas through or imposing my will? Or do I say I'm going to be amazing at helping other people unfold and helping the team collaborate? And I set up my reward circuits, if you like, on that mode. Yeah. I once had I'm not going to say what the context was, but I had someone who was teaching me something. Yeah. And they were a bit of a DICK. I mean, they were, not a nice person, and they had a huge ego. And actually, though I don't like to admit it, it made them into a good teacher, because they could not deal with you failing as a student. And their ego was so big that they couldn't imagine it was your fault. Because they saw their teaching as so important that if it was not working, the fault must lay with them because they were godlike in their teaching powers, which is a really messed up view. But in terms of me as being a student of theirs, it was amazing, because if they couldn't get something over to you, they'd be phoning other teachers. They'd be looking for other ways to do it. They'd try 100 different ways because they couldn't cope with you not learning it. So that was maybe an extreme version, a not healthy version of this. But you can say, if I want to attach my own keep my own value, I can see myself in a different role. For me, I see myself as a facilitator, as someone who creates the space for others to do amazing work. And I hope I'm useful in that. And I see my successes in that, not in whether or not my content ideas get implemented or whether or not the project, the initial goal happens. Yeah. It's like, did we work together usefully and produce something useful at the end, even if it was something unexpected? That's how I see myself. I can maintain my ego, my fragile actor's ego, by saying I facilitated.
I really love this line of thought because, again, you are not trying to suppress your ego, which is there, but again, you, as you say, you redirect it, right?
Mm.
And I think it's a really, really good point you're making. Because thinking about, I mean, there are big spiritual movements. I think about Buddhism, for example, like the ego is a central part, right? And I think some of us are thinking of suppressing the ego, like it's not allowed for you to want anything. You should not want anything. But it's very, very hard because you're kind of working against yourself. And what you are saying, I think, makes really sense to say, yes, I want something, but I can redirect it and feed my ego by being useful to others, which is kind of a paradox, but it works, apparently.
Maybe. And I don't know if it's very healthy. I mean, I think probably that most of us have too much ego, and we would do well to chip away at that a little bit, or soften it out, or let's say spread it out between different things.
Yeah.
Luckily, the kind of work we're talking about here around improvisation, around innovation, and so on, you are going to have so many fails.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have countless fails. That naturally you start to relax a bit about this stuff. And when you're relaxing about it, that is your ego kind of subsiding a little bit, I think. And especially if we do the things I talked about having multi-track things, having lots of balls in the air because we know some are going to fail, bunch of prototypes, a bunch of ideas, a bunch of insights that are all swimming along, and some of them are dying off. Yeah. Then a bunch of those, I'm going to have a little bit of my ego in rather than all of it in one of them. And as they die off or succeed, it's a part of my ego which is dying off or succeeding. It's not the whole thing in a sort of stand or fall situation.
Okay. It's a little bit like Voldemort, who splits its soul into like 7 pieces or so.
Thank goodness. We're on horcruxes already.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Interesting to think about that. Yeah. I wasn't preparing anything except a couple of keywords that I would like to just throw into the room towards the end, and you can just share whatever you want, whatever comes to mind.
Let's see if this works.
And the first one would be fear.
Fear. I was actually just teaching about fear just an hour before this conversation here in Madrid at the IE Business School, because we were talking about those two, my very simplified binary model of behavior, which is good when we are running the business, and the familiar, the be careful, don't take risks, get it right, think ahead, plan ahead, be smart, that kind of behavior. And the other kind of behavior where you let go and you try stuff and you mess around, which is we call freedom behavior, which is useful for doing new stuff. And I posed the question to the students, where do you go if you're afraid? And they all agreed immediately. You go to what you know. You go to plan ahead, be careful, get it right. Yeah. So that's really interesting, because when we are trying to make things better in organizations, to improve things, to innovate things, we're going into the unknown. And that's scary. And so that drives us precisely towards that kind of behavior, that get it right behavior, which is going to make us fail. So we have this very nasty little feedback loop there of we need to adopt this behavior, this let go and try something behavior, but the fear of the consequences of that drive us back towards the other side of behavior, the plan it out, the get it right behavior. So fear is very, very important. And as a facilitator, we're trying to move people this way and move them that way. Sometimes we want the get it right behavior. Sometimes we want the try something behavior. And generally, we can use fear to move people towards the get it right behavior. And we can use a feeling of safety or trust to move them towards the just let's try something behavior. So fear is a strong word to say. I don't want to say that I want my participants to feel afraid, but let's say responsible. Yeah, someone might say, okay, the typical situation is you have folks who are very used to get it right, and you say, okay, let's get you into try something mode, try something, see what happens mode, and they go, oh, I don't want to. Oh, this is fun. Wee Post-its, yay! What are you? Prototypes, awesome. We go, wait. We still have a roadmap. We still have legislation. We have a budget. We have deadlines. We have resources that we have to maintain, and you use that reminder to bring them back into that more, let's say, get it right behavior. And then you need to say, but we also need to be responsible and have a portfolio of options. They come back into this one. So you're using fear and trust or responsibility and safety to push people backwards and forwards. And that's very, very central to my work.
Yeah.
Using fear positively.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I have two more words. The next one, I don't know how it came to my mind, but the second word would be rebellion.
That's a nice word. I'm thinking, I don't know the origin of the word rebellion, but I think comes from the Latin, and it means turning over. Yeah. I think, because I think it's similar to the word for revolt. Yeah. And I was in my Spanish hotel this morning, and the Spanish phrase for scrambled eggs is huevos revoltos, I think, eggs which have been turned over. So revolution, the revolt, the stuff like this. And I thought that's really, really interesting, because both those words in English, to revolt has two meanings. It means to turn the world over, but also to be obnoxious, to be revolting. Yeah, the children are revolting. What does it mean? Does it mean the children are rebelling, or does it mean they are disgusting? And I think it's interesting to notice how that happens. You know, how a word that means change becomes a word that means disgust. We've gone a bit from the rebellion away here, you know, but there's that, I don't know if there are any Star Wars fans watching, you know, but there's that rebel, you know, there's that you scum, rebel scum. Yeah. To be proud of being the rebellious one, to be proud of revolting or being revolting. And that's interesting. There's an identity thing coming up here as well. And we have that conscious thing, let's say rebellion, revolution, between revolution and evolution. You know, when is one appropriate? When is the other appropriate? When do we need dramatic change? When do we need incremental change, and so on and so forth? And often there's a lot of bets placed on that. People, you know, see their career as being the one who is the rebel, maybe within a certain framework, but who makes a big change and gets things done and so on. And that's awesome. Yeah, that's how you make careers and so on. The problem is most of our organizations are messing up on the basics. They're messing up on the kind of stuff that a rebellion will not help. It's just about doing the boring stuff to get it fixed.
Yeah.
You can look at things like, you know, Carnot model and so on, about, you have to fix the basics. Sorry, fix the basics first and things like this. You make career by being a rebel, by changing the world, by flipping it over, because that gets attention. It's not what we need most of the time. We don't need the wow factor most of the time. We need the basics fixed. There's a wonderful story which we put in the book about a burger chain. I forget the author of this one, so forgive me. But this burger chain was spending lots and lots of money on having amazing new burgers, you know, revolutionizing, really interesting recipes that changed all the time. So you'd always get different burgers when you went there and so on like that. And they invested very heavily in that one. And the users, the customers, said, the lines are too long. You need to fix that first. You need to fix the basic factor before you can be a rebel. You know?
Yeah.
There are times there are things we should rebel against. Fair enough, but that's what it made me think of.
Yeah. And you, with your, let's say, artistic background that you also have, working in this, to some extent, very highly executive business environments, do you feel like a rebel sometimes in your work with the stuff you're doing?
I think what's very useful, I don't think I'm an artist. I worked in entertainment a long time. I don't have any artistic ambition at all. But I think that being an outsider is super useful. Now, I'm British and German. I spent most of my life in Germany, but I have a British accent when I speak German and when I speak English as well. And people notice I'm an outsider, and that can be a super, super useful card to play. You can notice things. Yeah, I'm very aware I'm an old white guy outsider. I'm the good kind of outsider. Yeah, and there are people who have it very different with their backgrounds and so on. I'm very aware of that. But to say I have a different perspective is very, very useful. I have some weird activities that I do as part of my facilitation, and Honestly, I don't remember where I learned them. I picked them up somewhere on the road. And sometimes I'll say, oh, I got this when I was studying psychology. And the next day I describe the same activity. So I got this when I worked in Japan. Or, I got this from the theater. And you choose some outsider perspective, which gives you permission to do a thing which is unusual. Let's see if it works here. And so being an outsider gives you lots of permissions, having a different point of view. As a facilitator, one of my main inspirations is a Brazilian theater maker called Augusto Boal, who invented a kind of theater which is often called forum theater. He was a very political theater maker. He called it theater of the oppressed. Yeah? And there's a facilitator role in that, which he called the joker. So you're the facilitator, but you're the joker. Think of a pack of cards. There are two jokers in a pack of cards, and they're very unusual cards. They don't belong to any of the suits. They're not a diamond or a heart or a club. Yeah? They are outside that. And that means they can take different roles, and they can move their status up and down. They can beat a king, or they can lose to a 2. Yeah? So that's a very interesting model of a facilitator, somebody who exists outside the power structures, or who can merge into any of them as needed, and someone who can adopt different power levels as well. That's a fun thing to think about.
Last word for today would be harmony. What do you think about that?
I'm one of those people who has a strong preference for harmony. In another context where I spent a lot of my time, people even called me the blue helmet, because I was often the one who'd be going in trying to sort of, calm things down, make peace, help people see the other person's point of view and stuff like this. And it was meant kindly, but also critically as well, because some conflicts are unnecessary. But I'm not good around conflicts. So harmony is important to me. What I've learned is that it's not important to everybody. Mm-hmm. It's a preference. It's a preference. And preferences are really, really incredibly important in our work, to understand that not all the world thinks like I do. And I mentioned him before, my colleague Renatus Hoogenraad, he taught me an exercise which I've just done with a bunch of people. And if you're on video, you'll see that I'm now folding my arms. Yeah. So Renatus says, fold your arms. And I fold my arms like this. Yeah. The way that I always do it. And it's easy. It takes no thought at all. And then Renatus will say, fold them the other way. And I take a moment to think, and I have to consciously rearrange my arms. And it doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel weird. He says, go back to your old method. Oh, that's so easy. That needs no thought. It's so easy for me. Yeah. Change it again. Okay. It was slightly easier this time. So I've got a preference for the way I fold my arms. That's easy. That's my default setting. And if I'm not required to think about it, that's what I will go. And I've realized that harmony is one of my preferences. That I will generally try to soothe conflicts and make sure everyone's okay and there's no fighting going on and so on. But that is a preference. There are others who say, no, this conflict is useful. It's necessary. Yeah. It's good to have dispute at this moment, antagonism between people. Adam, your preference is not useful here. My preference is something else. Let's have it out. Let's make progress. Let's get past this thing. I've had to learn to do that as well, but it's like folding my arms the other way. It's not natural for me. If I do it often enough, I can learn it, and I can learn that many of the things that I find very, very self-evident, obvious, are not obvious at all. They're just my preference. Yeah. Harmony is one of those.
Talking about harmony, I found this was a very harmonious conversation with you.
Thanks. I love the word thing. That worked really well.
Especially as we didn't prepare, it was very harmonious. So we proved maybe to some extent that improvisation works, at least in this conversation.
I mean, one of those, I think the first answer I really was like, well, it was the rebel one, where I was like, I took weird links, yeah, going from the Latin origin of the root and my Spanish breakfast and stuff like this, and turning into, and I don't know if anything was useful in that, but I noticed things were lighting up as I was going through that. That's a great example, I think, of improvisation, is that you don't have to know where it's going to take you. You go into it. You were busy making me look good. I knew you'd rescue me if I mess this up. And there were some new connections there in my head. So that's great.
Amazing. Any last words, Adam, that you want to share?
I just want to invite people to check out a non-profit, which is a great way to practice some things we've been talking about here, to get interested in innovation or in improvisation and stuff like this. It's the Global Jams. So global, meaning worldwide, jams as in music jams, or a jar of marmalade, if you like. So globaljams.org. It's a non-profit. Once a year, we get together at locations all around the world, and people get a common challenge, and they try to design a future. And while they're doing that, they're linked up with other places around the world. They're seeing amazing facilitation methods, or they're trying them themselves. They're having a good time, and they're working incredibly hard while having a good time. For me, it's one of the most important learning environments I know. We've been involved in it we set it up 13 years ago. I'm still learning from it. It's usually free or just for a cost price, wherever you are. Check out globaljams.org.
Amazing. I'll put the link also in the show notes.
Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much for your time, for sharing all those insights.
Thanks for having me.
Very interesting. And keep up the good work.
Thanks, Paul. See you down the road.